church. I'm Bonnie Dickerson. This is Margot Vitello, and we are service unit kind of co-leaders of the Roanoke Valley service unit. And that includes Benton, Salem, Roanoke County, Roanoke City. So it's a large group, and we're so happy to see you all here tonight. We are here for a special cabinet meeting. The March service unit meeting will begin similar to Congress with an invocation and pledge to the flag of the United States. The invocation and pledge to the flag will be presented by Maggie Hawkins.
Please stand. We are thankful for this day that you have given us, for its blessings, its opportunities, its challenges. May we appreciate and use each day that comes to us. We pray for strength and guidance for each day as it comes, for each day's duties, for each day's problems. May we be challenged to give our best always, and may we be assured of your presence with us. Amen.
Amen.
Remain standing for the pledge to the flag. We will recite the pledge as it is written, one nation under God. One nation under God. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Girl Scout promise and law. On my honor,
I will try to serve God
and my country,
to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law.
If there's others here that are not Girl Scouts, this is your part. So we, with being the others, would say to do the best that is in me to honor God, to rejoice in life, to be a loyal citizen, and to offer other my help and friendship.
Live by the Girl Scout law.
A code to give direction in my life.
I will do my best to be
Honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, responsible for what I say and do,
and to respect myself and others,
respect authority, use resources wisely, make the world a better place, and be a sister to every Girl Scout.
Do we want to go back and redo it, or just roll?
That's fine. Thanks, Maggie. You can all be seated. I am Barbara Dirk, and I am delighted that you're here. March is Women's National History Month. During the month of March, we recognize all of the amazing accomplishments of strong, determined women who have made it possible for us to be here today. Since 1987, the United States has formally recognized March as National Women's History Month. And for us as Girl Scouts, that's very appropriate because we have Girl Scouts birthday here, we've got Girl Scout Week, Girl Scout Sabbath, Girl Scout Sunday. Women have championed the way forward for you, for all of us to succeed. In 1920, women were granted the right to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment. In 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman appointed to the United States Supreme Court. 1983, Sally Ride became the first woman in space. In 2016, Hillary Rodham Clinton ran for president. The President of the United States has a cabinet, and that cabinet meets weekly. The people in the cabinet include the Vice President and the heads of 14 executive departments. Tonight, we have persons representing the President of the United States and 7 of her cabinet members. The President has championed the women's suffrage movement and campaigned for equal voting rights for women and African Americans. She was instrumental in passing laws that allowed women to own property. She helped organize training for women to get jobs and for all female labor unions. One of her favorite quotes is, "There will never be complete equality until women themselves help to make laws and elect lawmakers." It is my privilege to introduce to you the President of the United States, Susan B. Anthony, women's suffrage leader 1820 to 1906. Madam President.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for allowing me and my cabinet to join the Girl Scouts of Virginia Skyline in Benton, Virginia. We have been waiting for all of you. For you are the future. You are the ones who are going to make the difference. You are the ones who are going to carry on the torch, the sparks of which we have ignited. So we are so happy to be here with you tonight. I have 7 cabinet members with me from different periods of history. And my cabinet members with me today are Secretary of Transportation, Harriet Tubman, Secretary of Education, Malala Yousafzai, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Elizabeth Blackwell, Secretary of Defense, Peggy Whitson, Secretary of the Interior, Rachel Carson, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Clara Barton, and Secretary of Labor, Juliet Gordon-Law. Look, before I recognize individually each of my cabinet members, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Imagine that you have a job, any job, like delivering newspapers, or babysitting, or walking dogs. Suppose that on payday, your employer says, "Here is your money, but because you're a girl, I'll only pay you half as much as I'd pay a boy." Would that be fair?
No.
Of course not. I spent my life fighting unfairness. I am Susan B. Anthony. I was born in Massachusetts, but I grew up in New York State. At that time, women couldn't keep the money they earned, go to college, or vote. I was fortunate that my father belonged to the Religious Society of Friends, or Quakers. Quakers believe women and men are equals. They also believe in education for girls and boys, hard work, and working to end injustice. My father taught me to be independent. When I was 12, he hired me to work in his cloth mill. I worked 12 hours a day for 2 weeks and earned my first money. I used it to buy pretty teacups for my mother. At age 19, I finished school and became a teacher. Teaching was the most respectable job a woman could have back then. But I was paid less than men who were teachers for doing exactly the same work. That made me angry. I believed I should receive equal pay for equal services rendered. I protested. but it didn't make a difference. Other women would accept the unfair pay, so I had to accept it too, or quit. After a few years, I did quit. Teaching didn't satisfy me. I wanted to work to end the injustice I saw in the world. I supported the temperance movement against the sale and use of liquor. People who drink too much cause a lot of problems. I was also an abolitionist. That means I worked to abolish or end slavery. Can you imagine? Americans owned other people and treated them like farm animals. In 1851, I traveled to Seneca Falls, New York, for an abolition meeting. There, I met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a leader in the women's rights movement. We became lifelong friends and worked together for women's suffrage, the right of women to vote. We wrote long speeches supporting women's rights. I made many trips across the country, giving the speeches and lecturing on women's rights. When I spoke, I would say, what we demand is that women shall have the vote, for she will never get her other rights until she demands them with a ballot in her hands. Often the people in the audience would boo or call me names because they thought I was unladylike and because they disagreed with me. But disapproval never stopped me. It challenged me to work harder. In 1872, I voted in the presidential election. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution said all people born in the United States were citizens. It also guaranteed that no legal privileges, including the right to vote, could be denied to any citizen. I was a citizen, so wasn't I guaranteed the right to vote too? I was arrested, illegally and tried in court. The judge decided I was guilty before my trial even started. He ordered me to pay a $100 fine, but I refused and went to jail. I started gathering signatures on a petition demanding that a women's suffrage amendment be added to the Constitution. 10,000 people from 26 states signed. When I took the petitions to the U.S. Senate, they laughed. Every year after that, I appeared before Congress and tried unsuccessfully to get them to pass a women's suffrage amendment. In 1906, when I was 86 years old, I made my last speech. There were many young women in the audience that day, and I told them, the fight must not cease. You must see that it does not stop. Failure is impossible. Several weeks later, I died. It took 14 more years for all women to win the right to vote. In 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, became law. It says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on the account of sex. I am proud that my work helped win the right to vote for all women who came after me. The first secretary I would like to introduce is the Secretary of Transportation, Harriet Tubman. Harriet was an abolitionist from 1820 to 1912. She always says, on my Underground Railroad, I never ran my train off the track and I never lost a passenger. I will let her tell you her story.
Madam President, may I ask permission to tell you and the other members of the cabinet about myself?
Yes.
Okay. That's me. I made my way to freedom and helped hundreds of other slaves get away. But that's the middle of my story. Let's start at the beginning. I was born in a slave hut in Maryland in 1820 or 21. My parents were Ben and Harriet Ross. We were property of That's me. I made my way to freedom and helped hundreds of other slaves get away. But that's the middle of my story. Let's start at the beginning. I was born in a slave hut in Maryland in 1820 or 21. My parents were Ben and Harriet Ross. We were property of a plantation owner named Edward Brodus. My parents named me Artemina, but I took my mother's name, Harriet. We lived in a cabin with a dirt floor and no furniture. I remember sleeping on a pile of hay on the floor with my feet in the ashes or cooking fire to keep warm. When I was small, 2 of my sisters were sold to a slave trader. I never forgot the helpless, terrified looks on their faces as they were dragged away. We never saw them again. I never went to school. I was put to work when I was 6 years old, doing household chores. Later, when I was 7, Mr. Brodus hired me to work at a woman hired me out to a woman who had me do housework all day long. She had me rock her baby all night long. If I fell asleep and the baby cried and woke its mother, then she'd beat me. Later, Mr. Brodus had me work outdoors. Sometimes I would work alongside my father. When we worked in the forest, cutting trees, my father pointed out plants you could eat and plants you could use as medicine. He taught me how to walk quietly in the woods. One day I tried to help a slave who was running away. The overseer in charge of the slaves threw a big heavy weight at the slave to stop him, but it hit me right here. I almost died. It left me with a dent in my forehead, and I would often fall asleep for no reason. When I was 23, Mr. Brodus allowed me to marry John Tubman, a free black man. I wanted John to run away with me, but he refused, so I stayed. But a few years later, I found out I was going to be sold. I knew I had to escape right away. There was a woman who I thought helped runaway slaves, so I went to her house. She gave me food and told me how to get to another safe place. I heard rumors about an underground railroad that helped slaves escape to freedom. I discovered it wasn't really a railroad after all. It was a network of people helping slaves find their way to freedom in the North. I traveled on this network, staying in the shadows and sometimes wading in rivers so I wouldn't be tracked or captured. I made my way to safely north and settled in Philadelphia, where I found work as a cook. I saved every penny I made so I could go back and rescue the other slaves. But in 1850, the government passed the Fugitive Slave Act. This law said runaway slaves living anywhere in the United States could be returned to their owner, and anyone helping them would go to jail. Runaways had to go all the way to Canada, another 400 miles, just to be safe. The possibility of being returned to slavery didn't stop me from going back and leading more people to freedom. On my first trip, I rescued my sister Mary and her family. After that, I made two trips a year to Maryland. Whenever I went, I saw wanted posters with huge rewards for my capture. But I knew places where I could hide and not be found. We often waded neck deep in icy streams to escape the men and bloodhounds looking for us. In 10 years, I made 19 trips and rescued over 300 slaves without being caught. In 1861, the Civil War began. I worked for the Union Army, both as a nurse and as a spy. Once I even led a raid in South Carolina and freed 800 slaves. By the end of the war, the Army refused to pay me because I was a woman. After that, I joined Susan B. Anthony in the women's rights movement. I lived to be 93 years old. During my life, I braved every obstacle to lead people to freedom. There were many dangers along the way, But on my Underground Railroad, I never ran my train off track and I never lost a passenger. Thank you, Madam President.
The Secretary of Education is the youngest person in my cabinet. Her age is irrelevant. She has already made significant contributions to changing world perceptions for women. Listen to some of her quotes. Let us pick up our books and our pens. They are the most powerful weapons. I told myself, Malala, you have faced death. This is your second life. Don't be afraid. If you are afraid, you can't move forward. The Secretary of Education speaks not for herself, but for those without a voice. The right to live in peace, the right to be treated with dignity, the right to equality of opportunity, and the right to be educated. The President recognizes Secretary of Education Malala Yousafzai. I recognize Secretary Yousafzai.
I am Malala. You might remember me as the girl who was shot in the head by the Taliban, but I am here to tell you about my life before I was shot, when I was just a girl named Malala Yousafzai. I was born July 12, 1997 in the Swat Valley of Pakistan. By American standards, my family was very poor, but if you measured my family by commitment to one another, we were rich. We were also unlike many Sunni Muslim families, who celebrated the birth of a boy with the firing of rifles and hid their newborn daughters away. Most families lived in fear of a terrorist organization called the Taliban, which controlled much of our country, but my parents refused to hide me. In fact, they were so proud to have a daughter they named me after a famous warrior woman called Malala. The Taliban claimed to follow the laws of Islam, but this is not true. Islam, the religion of Muslim people, is the belief in one God like Christianity or Judaism. Muslims believe in compassion, doing good deeds for others, and leading moral lives, but the Taliban use our religion to do bad things. They force people to follow very strict rules and treat women worse than insects. The Taliban believe they must prevent girls from getting educated. That way, when those girls are women, they will follow the orders of men. My father, a poet and an educated man, bravely started a chain of schools in the Swat Valley for boys and girls. My parents were determined to educate me like my two younger brothers. Many girls stayed home because getting educated could cost them their lives. That's because our schools were under attack. They were often destroyed by bombs, and female students were threatened or even killed. Sometimes I was afraid, but my determination to attend school was greater than my fear. I firmly believed then, as I do now, that just one child, one teacher, one book, and one pen could change the world. In 2009, we learned that the British Broadcasting Corporation was looking for a Pakistani schoolgirl to write about the challenges of going to school in the Swat Valley. Although I was just 12 years old, my father and I decided I would write an anonymous blog for the BBC. I was eager to express my views about the Taliban and the control they had over our lives. They limited what we read, watched on TV, listened to, or enjoyed doing. But women especially were a threat, so they denied us our right to an education. This angered me. Although my father and I received death threats over my blog, I agreed to be filmed for a documentary for the first time. My name and face were revealed to the public. I was just a child, but people wanted to hear my story. I received so much attention that in 2011, I was awarded Pakistan's first National Youth Peace Prize and was nominated for the International Children's Peace Prize. Now, on international stage, I continue to voice my concerns about the Taliban. Not surprisingly, I was soon on their most wanted list. On Tuesday, October 9th, 2012, my life changed forever. I was 15 years old, sitting in my school bus with two friends. A masked gunman stepped in and called me by name. "Which one of you is Malala?" he yelled. Fearing he would shoot us all, I replied, "I am Malala." And then he fired 3 shots. One single bullet pierced my head, neck, and shoulder. The shooter thought I was dead, but I wasn't. After several emergency surgeries, I was brought to England for further treatment, as well as for my safety. After 3 months in the hospital, I was discharged. My family and I chose to stay in England. where we still live today. Meanwhile, Islamic leaders condemned the Taliban for shooting me, and Pakistan officials offered a reward for the capture of my attackers. The attempt to assassinate me made international news, prompting an outpouring of anger and sympathy. Numerous protests resulted in the passage of the Right to Education Bill, the first of its kind in Pakistan. I became a global advocate for millions of girls denied a formal education. It also started the Malala Fund to help empower girls to raise their voices, to unlock potential, and to demand change. On my 16th birthday in 2013, I spoke at the United Nations, giving the first public speech after my attack. I said, the terrorists thought they would change my aims and stop my ambitions, but nothing changed in my life except this. Weakness, fear, and hopelessness died. Strength, power, and courage were born. In October 2014, while studying chemistry in school, I learned I was co-awarded the prestigious Nobel Peace Prize, an honor shared with Kailash Satyarthi, a children's rights activist from India. I'm the first Pakistani and the youngest person to ever win. While the international community supports me in this fight, this award is really for all children. We realize the importance of our voices only when we are silenced, and I refused to be silenced. No longer am I just that girl who was shot by the Taliban. I am Malala. Thank you, Madam President.
The President recognized the Secretary of Education, I recognize the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Elizabeth Blackwell was America's first woman physician. She lived between 1821 and 1910. She was told that women couldn't be doctors. Secretary Blackwell, tell us your story.
I was born in England in 1821. I had 9 brothers and sisters, and my family believed we were all equal. We moved to the United States when I was 11 years old. My name is Elizabeth Blackwell. As I grew up, I was eager to be of real use in the world. One day I went to visit a woman friend who was dying. She asked me to think about becoming a doctor and finding new ways to fighting disease. I loved my friend and thought about what she said. But at that time, a woman doctor was unheard of in the United States. My brothers were excited about the idea, but other people said it was unthinkable. I was told that no true lady would be able to stand the sights, smells, and jokes of a medical school. Besides, women were not admitted to the schools that provided the necessary training. One doctor advised me to dress in men's clothing and attend some classes. He said that might give me some satisfaction, but of course it wouldn't give me a diploma. His suggestion made me very angry. I told him I was willing to go anywhere, but I would go as myself. I went to work as a music teacher in North Carolina to save money for medical school. The school principal I worked for had a doctor's degree, and he agreed to let me read his medical books and help me study for medicine. When I had saved enough money, I went to Philadelphia, where Dr. Warrington allowed me to visit his patients, attend his lectures, and use his library. He helped me apply to all the medical schools in the United States. Some were polite and some were not, but the reply was always the same, no. Dr. Warrington then suggested I apply to a few medical schools that were just starting. Finally, one school, Geneva Medical College in New York, admitted me. I had no way of knowing the head of the college had let its students decide whether or not to admit a woman student. They were in a playful mood that day, and as a joke voted to admit me. But I gradually won their respect and went on to graduate in 1849 at the top of my class of 150 students. It might seem the worst was over, but I was now free to participate in medicine, but I realized I needed more training. As a woman doctor, I was going to have to be better than the best male physician in the world. So I went to Paris for further study. Then something awful happened. While I was taking care of a baby with an eye disease, One of my eyes became infected. I became blind in that eye and had to give up my plans to study surgery. When I returned to New York, I opened up my own office since no infirmaries, which were like hospitals, would hire me. Even after all I had been through, most people refused to believe I was a capable doctor. From time to time, through chance or an emergency, I did get patients. By the time my sister Emily had also become a doctor, we rented a large old-fashioned home in New York and in 1857 opened a New York infirmary for women and children. 11 years later, we expanded it to include a medical college for women with standards equal to those at men's colleges. Later, I returned to England where I lectured and wrote until I died at the age of 89. By sheer determination, I had become a good doctor, but I had to spend most of my life proving it. In the process, though, I opened the doors for all the women doctors who came after me. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Secretary Parker. The Secretary of Defense is Peggy Whitson. She was born in 1960 and is a biochemist, NASA astronaut, and space station commander. I am honored to have her serve in my cabinet as Secretary of Defense.
I am Peggy Winston. Did you ever have a dream that you could be someone special? Did you ever keep a dream even though others told you to forget it? I was only 9 years old when I was first imagined to my dream, and I took off, and it took many years until it came true. My name is Peggy Winston, and I am America's first female space flight commander. On July 29, 1969, my mother and I sat there watching the Apollo spaceship slowly descend onto the surface of the moon. After the ship landed, the voice of Neil Armstrong and lead astronaut pilot the ship said, "Houston, this is Tranquility Base. The Eagle has landed." The next day, Armstrong put his foot on the moon's surface. He said, "One small step for man, one giant step for mankind." I watched that day as they walked on the moon, and I knew beyond a doubt that one day I would be an astronaut. I grew up in a small farming community, and I worked long days during the summer and to make a successful. In first grade, I started having trouble in school. I turned out I needed glasses. A nerd because I was so serious. A friend told me to smile at other students. Instead, I was being so serious in high school. I played basketball and ran track. The year I graduated from high school, Sally Ride was chosen to be the first female American astronaut, and that made my dream sound possible. I went to Iowa Wesleyan College, and my college advisor said I should go to medical school. In fact, one professor told me that manned space flight and would be done by robots, but that advice didn't stop me. I went to Rice University, earned my doctorate in biochemistry. I did get a job at NASA Johnson Space Center, but as a research associate. You may wonder what a research scientist has to do with space travel, but there are many physical problems associated with being space for long periods of time, such as weightlessness and effects of radiation on humans. Future space travel will involve years of living on ship. The interesting project I worked on was how to clean urine to make it drinkable. In 1996, I was finally selected to be a candidate for an astronaut to begin 2 years of rigorous training. Just closing your hands requires a lot of upper body strength, so I lifted weights every day. And when I got back home, it feels like you're carrying a person on your back, because in space you are weightless. I took my first space flight as a part of the Endeavour Expedition 5 crew. My parents were there to watch me lift off. We were headed towards the International Space Station, where I conducted 21 investigations in human life science and microgravity. On my second flight in 2007, I traveled into space as the first female commander to lead any space exploration. Our primary responsibility was to expand the station's living and working space. I took 5 space walks to repair items outside the ship. On that flight, we were rearranging a solar array when a piece broke off. I spent 192 days in space on that trip. In 2017, at the age of 56, I became the oldest woman to fly into space as commander of the Expedition 50/51. We did experiments in biotechnology, physical science, and Earth space. We also welcomed several cargo spaceships delivering tons of supplies. I have now been on a total of spacewalks adding up to 40 hours. I have spent 665 days in space, a world record for women astronauts. During my trips in space, I would look out the window and, oh my gosh, so much color and texture. I don't know if it has to do with the clarity, because there are no particulates in air. But you see so much on the spacewalk. You're traveling 17,500 miles on an hour across. The planet you are looking down, the views going past. One of the most beautiful sights is when the rim of the Earth is bright on one of the sides, and you see its defined line of the atmosphere. You see how close and thin it is. We've got to be careful. We've got to take care of this planet. Well, my dream came true. I hope your dreams come true also. Thank you, Madam President.
The Secretary of Interior is writer, scientist, and ecologist Rachel Carson. Secretary Carson lived from 1907 to 1964. Her book, The Sense of Wonder, caused people to look at the environment they were creating. A quote from her book, The Silent Spring. Over increasingly large areas of the United States, spring now comes unheralded by the return of the birds, and the early mornings are strangely silent, where once they were filled with the beauty of bird song. And another quote from The Sense of Wonder. A rainy day is the perfect time for a walk in the woods. Secretary Carson is the right person to shift our thinking so we can protect the environment. I recognize Secretary Carson.
Have you ever gone for a walk in the woods? If you go early in the morning before the sun comes up, you'll hear the birds singing as they wake up. When I was a little girl, my mother and I liked to do that. We would take a flashlight and walk in the dark woods. We'd sit quietly on a log and listen for the first sleepy little chirp. Soon, the woods near our Pennsylvania farm would be awake with all the birds singing. These early morning walks with my mother filled me with a sense of wonder with the natural world. My name is Rachel Carson. Let me tell you my story. I was born in 1907 in the small town of Springdale, Pennsylvania. When I was growing up, I thought I'd be a writer. I wrote a story when I was 10 that won a $10 prize and was published in a magazine. When I graduated from high school, I went to Pennsylvania College for one. I majored in English and wrote many articles and stories for the college newspaper and literary magazine. Then the funniest thing happened. I had to take a biology class. Sometimes our teacher took us hiking in a nearby forest. It reawakened my sense of wonder with the nature. It was so much fun that I changed my course of study from writing to zoology. After I finished college, I spent the summer at the Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole, Massachusetts. I worked from sunrise until late at night and met important ocean geographers and marine biologists from all over the country. After that summer, I decided to study marine zoology. I attended Johns Hopkins University and received my master's degree in 1932. Because I was a scientist and I could write too, I was hired by the United States Bureau of Fisheries. I worked there for 16 years and had several jobs. My first job was writing stories about fishing and marine life for a radio show called Romance Under the Seas. Back then, radio shows were as popular as TV shows are today. Later, I took a test that was required for a promotion to a full-time biologist. I scored higher than all the other candidates, all men, and was the first woman the Bureau of Fisheries ever hired to be a biologist. My first assignment was writing a brochure using the information from the Romance Under the Seas radio shows. When I finished, my boss told me to send it to a magazine called The Atlantic Monthly. They liked my writing so much that a publisher wanted me to write a book. My first book was called Under the Sea Wind. I wrote many other books, always about nature and its wonders. In the sea around us, I wrote about the biology, chemistry, and geography and the history of the sea. Many people bought that book, and it became a bestseller. My most famous book, Silent Spring, was published in 1962. The book was inspired by a letter I had received from a friend. She owned a bird sanctuary and was very upset when the birds that had lived there started dying. My friend said that DDT, a pesticide, had been sprayed in the area. She asked me to find out more about the use of DDT. I contacted the other scientists to find out what they knew about it. I collected too much information for an article, so I decided to write a book. Farmers in cities use DDT to kill insects and other pests that ruined crops or annoyed people. The people using DDT didn't realize that it poisoned the food supply of animals and would also kill animals that they didn't want to kill. In the Silent Spring, I read about how pesticides were poisoning rivers and soils, and warned the people if we didn't stop using pesticides, then there might be a spring with no words would say, a silent spring. When people read The Silent Spring, it made them think about our environment and its precious creatures. It also led to the banning of DDT in the United States and other countries in 1973. All of my life, I had an intense curiosity for the natural world. I especially enjoyed sharing my sense of wonder
with my nephew, Roger, who became my adopted son when his mother, my sister, died. My book, The Sense of Wonder, was written for him. I died in 1964, 2 years after The Silent Spring was published. I was 56 years old. Thank you, Madam President.
Secretary of Veteran Affairs is Clara Barton, Civil War nurse and founder of the American Red Cross. She lived from 1821 through 1912. Barton was called an angel of the battlefield. I look forward to her implementing new standards and practices in our hospitals to serve our veterans. I call on Secretary Barton.
I was born in Massachusetts on Christmas Day in 1821. I was the youngest child of my family and had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My parents named me Clarissa, but I was called Clara all my life. Clara Barton. My family was a farmer, but before that he was a soldier. I loved listening to all of the stories about the war and how the soldiers lived. Sometimes my brothers and I would act out the battles he told us about. My mother thought dolls and toys were frivolous, and when I was very young, she taught me how to cook, sew, weave, make soap, tend the garden, and care for our dog. When I was 3, I learned to read, and when I started school, I could already do simple math problems. When I was 5, I learned how to ride horses. My brother David was badly injured in an accident when I was 11. For 2 years, I was at his bedside, acting as his nurse, until he recovered. That experience greatly influenced what I would do during my life. After that, I spent much of my life helping others who were ill or had troubles, but teaching was a career I chose. I was just 15 years old when I began teaching. In one classroom where there would be students of all ages, from toddlers to late teens. Later, I started the first free public school in New Jersey. I was very proud of the way it grew under my leadership. But when a man who was made superintendent of the school instead of me, I was very disappointed. But you see, women didn't hold important positions in those days. Only men did. I was so angry that I resigned and moved to Washington, D.C. I got a job working in the U.S. government patient office as a copyist. Typewriters had not been invented yet, and government papers had to be copied by hand.
Can you hold the microphone closer to your mouth, please?
I was paid 10 cents for every 100 words I copied and earned $1,400 a year, a good salary for women. When the Civil War began between the northern and southern states in 1861, the U.S. Patient Office and other buildings in Washington, D.C. became temporary hospitals for the soldiers wounded in the battle. I collected food, clothing, bandages, and other supplies to help the soldiers. But I wanted to do more than that. I wanted to help on the battlefield too. Many soldiers were dying before they could be taken to the hospitals. At first, the U.S. Army officials refused my help. In those days, a woman's place was not on the battlefield, but finally, I was allowed to go. The first time I went to a battlefield, I was horrified. The hospital was dirty and unsanitary, with no clean bandages or water. After that, I was recruited some of my friends to help. We took food and clean bandages to the battlefield hospitals, assisted the doctors, cleaned the hospital, and cared for the wounded soldiers. Often, I was the one who helped severely wounded soldiers left to die on the battlefield. When the war ended in 1865, the U.S. Congress put me in charge of tracking down 22,000 missing soldiers from all over the country. I also helped establish the first national cemetery for soldiers and gave many lectures about my experiences on the battlefield. Later, I traveled to Switzerland, where I became acquainted with the Red Cross, an organization dedicated to helping the wounded, sick, and homeless during times of war, no matter what country they were from. I began to think of forming an American Red Cross Society that would help Americans during time of war and peace. And in 1881, the American Red Cross was born. I was the first president of the Red Cross and held that position for more than 20 years. The Red Cross became known for its peacetime relief work during floods, epidemics, hurricanes, famines, earthquakes, forests, fires, and other natural disasters. The Red Cross also started first aid training and promoted the idea that being prepared for emergencies was just as important as disaster relief. I died in 1912 at the age of 91. After a life of service to the people of my country and the world, someone once said to me, she was the true hero of the age, an angel of the battlefield. Thank you, Mayor and Deputy.
The Secretary of Labor needs no introduction to the 12 million girls who have responded to her call to create a group called Girl Scouts. Secretary Julia Gordon-Low has organized a workforce of change in the United States. She said, "Right is right, even if no one else does it." She lived from 1860 to 1927. As Secretary of Labor, her work ethics and her attention to detail will change the workforce. I recognize Secretary of Labor, Secretary Lowe.
Madam President, members of the Cabinet, when I was a child, my favorite game was to act out the stories my grandmother Kinsey told us about her adventures in the wilderness. I never tired of that, the world of make-believe and adventures, and when I grew up, I kept the world open for many girls and their grown-up leaders. My name is Juliet Miguel Kinsey Gordon-Low, and I founded Girl Scouts of the USA. I was named after my pioneer grandmother, but my family called me Daisy. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, just before the Civil War began. I was an independent and outspoken child. My sister Nellie called me Crazy Daisy because I was so unpredictable. I enjoyed making up games, writing and acting in plays, and playing with my pet animals. When I turned 13, my parents sent me to boarding school in Virginia where I studied English and history and literature. 3 years later, I went to finishing school in New York City. The school was so strict we were required to speak only French when we were seldom allowed outside the building except in the company of our teachers. I was very talented at painting and drawing, but a poor student in spelling and math. After I finished my schooling, I traveled extensively, including 2 trips to Europe while I met William Lowe, a wealthy businessman. We were married in Georgia and left on our honeymoon, but had to return 2 days later because a piece of wedding rice had become lodged in my ear. The doctor tried to remove it, but I became totally deaf in that ear. My ear had an infection that had earlier left me partly deaf in my other ear, so I had very limited hearing. But I was not the kind of person to be stopped by a handicap. Once we settled in England, we lived very well. We traveled all around the world socializing with nobility and celebrities. When my husband died in 1905, he left a very confusing will. So for several years, I had to worry about money, something I've never done before. My poor math skills had matters worse because I was never sure how much money I had. But I continued to travel and still gave away money to people in need. I finally returned to London where I met Sir Robert Baden-Powell. He told me about his work with the Boy Scouts and also about his Girl Guide program he started. I was so impressed that within weeks I started a Girl Guide company. Later I returned to America to start a Girl Guide company there. I had founded a purpose in my life and was the happiest I've ever been. I gave the girls of Savannah the opportunity to play basketball, take nature hikes, and go camping and learn about boys and girls and the other lands. Some parents were shocked because they were expecting more ladylike activities, but most assumed anything I endorsed it was capable and was acceptable. In fact, there was so much interest in scouting, I decided to set up a national organization. In 1913, I founded the Girl Scouts of the USA within headquarters of Washington, D.C. I was convinced Girl Scouting and Girl Scout Guide would make the world a better place. While World War I raged, Girl Scouts across the nation participated in the Red Cross work, sold Liberty Bonds, and worked as nurses. The First Lady, Miss Woodrow Wilson, invited me to the White House and praised the work I did for the Girl Scouts. Girl Scouting had finally received the national acceptance and recognition that it deserved. I believe so strongly in Girl Scouting that for many years I paid all the expenses using money obtained through fundraising, but I still had built a strong organization. I helped start regional camps for girls and training for the leaders, designed an official uniform, wrote a guidebook, and established a national headquarters. In 1926, I succeeded in bringing girls from other countries to the United States for the World Camp. I wanted campers and leaders from around the world to think of each other as friends and neighbors. I died in 1927 and was buried in my full uniform with a tin cup and a knife on my belt. In my pocket was a telegram from the Girl Scout headquarters that read, "You are not only the first Girl Scout, but the best Girl Scout of them all."
Thank you, members of my cabinet. As the first female president with an all-female cabinet, we will be recognized for our contributions in making history. Together we can make the world a better place. And I want to invite the members of the audience to join us. There's information on the table over there in the corner about how you can work to get the next amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment, ratified to guarantee all of our rights. And if you would like you and your troops to have me join you in visiting our congressmen or our senators' offices in Roanoke, just let me know. The secretaries and I will be taking questions after the meeting is dismissed. But before you leave, as president, I have some questions for you to think about. Every woman has a story to tell and gifts to share the world. What is your story? How do you want to be remembered? Think to yourself, what is your goal in life? Who or what empowers you? Would you like to be President of the United States someday? If not President of the United States, then where would you like to lead? The cabinet meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, cabinet members, for allowing us to join you and making history. You're welcome to be with us. Thank you.
Great job, ladies. I want to thank all of these girls for being here, and thank you all for being here to see these girls and what they can do. I would like to ask if any of the scouts, do you have someone that inspires you? It might be a teacher, it might be a parent, it might be an aunt or a grandma. Think about those traits that you really, it inspires you to be a good person. So just like this cabinet or these people you just heard about, they were inspired by someone. So think about those people in your life that are inspiring you. Does anyone want to say inspired them? Anybody? You do.
Sure.
This isn't really a real person, but when Grace, the American Girl doll, became Girl of the Year, one year she inspired me to have my lifelong dream to be a pastry chef.
Very good.
She's not an actual living person, but
But that's okay.
Maggie.
Maggie? Where is she? Behind you. There we go.
My teacher, Miss Kazi,
Is there any one thing, or it's just
about
a whole bunch of things?
be a great teacher.
She's just a great teacher. Very good. Teachers are important, aren't they? You got one?
Miss Burgess,
Miss Burgess?
my English teacher,
Your English teacher.
she has a lot of patience.
She has a lot of patience. Did y'all hear that? Anybody else have someone who inspires them? You do.
Barbara Dirk.
Barbara Dirk.
She does a lot of really good work for our community, and she's an inspiration.
Very good, and I think a lot of us could second that. All right, now, we will have our regular service meeting things in a little bit, and we'll have refreshments. We have 2 girls who are going to get pinned. And this, Jalen
And Cameron.
and Cameron.
Cameron for sure.
You're the taller. Very good.
And National 94 has 2 sets of twins.
Now, we have already